My relationship with Ethan was like a dance without emotion. We lived in a simple house on the shores of Serenity Lake, surrounded by the quiet of the countryside, but something inside of me was crying out for change. Our conversations with Ethan were reduced to practical matters, discussing groceries, bills, and schedules, and the silence between us grew louder by the day. It was evident in the way we avoided eye contact during meals, the lack of shared laughter, and the unspoken tension that arose when we passed each other in the hallway. Where was the desire? Where was the passion that brought us together in the beginning? As I washed the dishes Tuesday afternoon, Sarah, my sister, came to mind. Her last visit to Marcus, her husband, was both joyous and a little awkward for me. Sarah had always been more spontaneous and lively than I was, and Marcus, he was a charming man, the kind of man who drew the eye wherever he went, and it wasn't just his looks, but the natural confidence that emanated from him. I felt small next to them, especially when I compared them to Ethan and me. While Sarah and Marcus laughed and seemed to be living a real passion, we barely exchanged glances, and it was at that moment that a bold thought suddenly popped into my head that made me stop, drop the plate I was washing, and look out the window for clarity. And if I tried to push the thought away, thinking it absurd, it came back again and again, insistently, as if it were an answer to the emptiness I felt. At dinner, I looked at Ethan. He was eating in silence, immersed in his thoughts. My palms sweated as I contemplated sharing this with him. I knew it was a risk, but maybe this was what we were missing, an escape from the monotony. My heart was pounding frantically. I took a sip of tea, trying to muster up some courage. "Ethan," I began, and my voice shook slightly. He looked at me, surprised at the seriousness of my tone. "Can I ask you a question?" "Sure," he said, setting the remote aside. "Have you ever thought about trying something new? Something that might bring emotion back into our marriage?" His expression turned thoughtful. I didn't know how to continue, but I realized there was no turning back. As soon as I said those words, the room filled with tension. Ethan looked at me, frowning slightly, but in his gaze I saw not only surprise, but interest. "What do you mean?" he asked, setting the cup on the table. My palms were sweating, and my heart was pounding so loudly in my chest I thought he could hear it. I took a deep breath and decided to speak bluntly. "I've been thinking about us, about how our relationship has become a habit. We care about each other, but we seem to have lost the spark we used to have," I began, trying not to show my fear. Ethan was silent, listening to me, so I continued. "Sometimes I wonder, what would happen if we tried something out of the ordinary? I don't know how you'd react to that, but I want to be honest." His eyes narrowed, like he was trying to anticipate what I was going to say next. Finally, I said what I'd been thinking for so long. "What if we try switching partners with Sarah and Marcus?" Those words hung in the air, and I felt the tension in the room become almost palpable. Ethan looked stunned, and I felt scared. Maybe I'd gone too far. "Sarah and Marcus," he repeated slowly. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. I nodded, avoiding his gaze. "It's a crazy idea, I know, but I feel like we're drowning in routine, and we need something to shake things up. Only if you agree, of course, and if that's what they want too." He fell silent. It was impossible to read on his face, and that only added to my fear. Finally, after a long pause, he said, "Honestly, I never thought about it. It sounds unexpected, but I won't say no right away." My heart dropped. He was willing to at least consider it. "But are you sure you really want it?" "I just want us to feel alive again," I whispered. I was afraid he'd reject me. Ethan hesitated, and I felt the excitement replaced by a faint flash of doubt. A few days later, I met Sarah at my house for a cup of tea. She came with a smile, but I couldn't shake off the simmering tension. "Sarah," I said, interrupting her story. She looked up in surprise. "I want to talk about something important, but it might seem strange to you." Her smile faded a little, but she remained attentive. "You're scaring me, Elena. What's the matter?" I looked away, trying to gather my thoughts. How could anyone say such things to their sister? "You and Marcus are doing well, aren't you?" I began with a cautious question. Sarah nodded, but frowned. "Of course, why do you ask?" I sighed. "It's not that. It's just that I thought our relationship with Ethan had become predictable," I replied. "And I had an idea. What if we tried something out of the ordinary, like switching partners, just once, without commitment, as an experiment?" Sarah froze, the cup in her hands halfway to her lips. At the same time, her face showed shock and bewilderment. I was feverish and wanted to fall under the ground. "Are you serious?" she finally squeezed out. "Yes, but I know it sounds crazy," I quickly added. "It's just an idea. No commitment, no expectations. We can back out right away if you or Marcus feel uncomfortable." She was silent for a long time, pondering. I couldn't pick up on her emotions. Finally, she set the cup on the table and looked me straight in the eye. "This is unexpected," she said slowly. "I never thought about it, but if Marcus is okay with it, I'm willing to discuss it." I felt a mixture of relief and excitement. The first hurdle had been overcome, but there was still a long way to go. A few days later, Sarah called me. Her voice was calm, but I could sense an underlying nervousness. "Elena, I spoke to Marcus," she began. My heart sped up. "And what did he say?" "He was shocked at first," Sarah admitted, "but then he thought about it and said it was okay if it was really something we all wanted to try." I felt both relieved and excited at the same time. Now it was up to Ethan and I to go over the details with them. We agreed to meet in the evening at our house. When Sarah and Marcus arrived, they brought a bottle of good wine. We set a light dinner and sat down at the table. The atmosphere was a little tense, but not hostile. After a few toasts and casual conversation, I finally decided to cut to the chase. "Well, let's talk about why we're here," I said, trying to make my voice sound confident. Sarah nodded, and Marcus cast a quick glance at her, as if wanting to make sure she was ready. "We decided that the most important thing is to set clear boundaries," I continued. "If anyone feels uncomfortable at any time, we'll stop. No expectations or obligations." Ethan backed me up, adding, "And this should in no way affect our relationship with each other. We need to be honest and open." Sarah smiled, trying to ease the tension. "Then it's a deal. Just one request. Let's do this in an atmosphere of trust, without secrecy." We all nodded, and the tension finally eased a little. We spent the rest of the evening in a more relaxed atmosphere, discussing the details. It was decided that the experiment would take place the following week at our home. When evening came, we got everything ready for dinner and tried to act natural. But when the moment came, there were unspoken words and nervous glances in the air. And so the night passed, each of us stepping into an unknown world, driven by a mixture of fear, excitement, and hope for change.